So the Hinmans had a pretty big day this past week. Our granddaughter Beckley turned 2, and I knew you wanted to see a picture, so I did bring one. And appropriately so, her parents threw her a big party, and of course they were blessed by our presence there, of course, and so on. Beckley's not the only one with a birthday in February. Who else has a birthday in February? Don't worry, we won't sing to you today, call you out in any way. Okay, great. Oh, Charlie does too. All right. He's so grateful you did that, Leah, right? So, on a scale of 1 to 5, so 1 being, I really don't want people to recognize my birthday ever, right? And 5 being, yeah, I mean, people should throw me a party. Where would you say you are in the birth? All of us now, not just everybody in the February group, okay? Who's more on the one side of the scale? Okay, Kathy, all right, number of you, all right. How many of you would say middle of the road, whatever, a little party or whatever, that's okay. How many of you say, yeah, I mean, bring it on, okay. All right, it's good to know that about you, thank you. Well, did you know that God doesn't want us to wait a year for a special day? In fact, actually, He designed us to have a special day every week, a day of rest, a day to relax, a day to recharge, a day to worship in His presence, and just enjoy the good things that He has given us. The blessings of family, the blessings of friends, the blessings of church family, the blessings of fellowship, food, football, we could say, okay? That's what we're going to talk about today. So I've titled the message, You Were Made to Rest. This is part 5 in our Jesus Stories with Luke series. So let's get the Bible open again to Luke 5, or 6, excuse me, if you've closed it. Outlining your bulletin, those of you online, again, great to have you with us, as Pastor Steve said, and you'll find this outline for this message and other resources at our website. So the dictionary defines rest as the ceasing of work or movement in order to relax, refresh oneself, or recover strength. Now, biblically speaking, rest is meant to be a time of peace and calm, free from work. Rest really, if you understand it biblically speaking, really symbolizes our salvation. And we'll get to that in a bit, that symbolism. But hear me, most of us don't know how to rest. And I'll speak for myself. I have to work to rest. And you say, what? That's an oxymoron, for sure, but that is the truth. And so many of us suffer from sleep disorders and sleep apnea and insomnia and anxiety issues, and the truth is we're not alone. Now, CDC says that 1 in 3 Americans do not get enough sleep. This week I was reviewing an annual publication of the American Psychological Association. They call it Stress in America Report. They publish it every year. And they describe this. This is the current situation, they said. They describe a battered American psyche facing a barrage of external stressors that are mostly out of a person's control. A majority of adults are disheartened by our government, worried about the threats of war and foreign adversaries, daunted by historic inflation levels, and dismayed by widespread violence in our country. And yet, despite the fact that we're sleepless and stressed, get this, only 54% of Americans, Americans use only 54% of the vacation time that they are given each year by employers. Only 54%. I say, are you crazy? I use every last day if I can. But this isn't just a problem. This whole idea of stress and all the rest isn't just a problem for parents of young children, and some of you are, and I get it, right? That stage of life, chasing little ones around. I talked to somebody before the service, and he said, I am worn out. I get it. Why, you might be. You got little ones, and it's not just for you. It's not just for middle-aged folks, those of us who are trying to get kids through college and all the dynamics that are involved in that, or for older adults who may be stressed out about their health or about money. No, actually, get this, 91% of Gen Z, so this would be high school and college age, okay, 91% of those age of Gen Z are dealing with extreme levels of stress. And analysts say that this is directly related to the isolation and the stress of falling behind after 2+ years of COVID craziness. And we're not even going to go there this morning. But these are the same students, that have dealt with years of seeing their parents horrified by mass shootings in schools, and they are the first generation, Gen Z is, of growing up their entire life totally connected to these things, right? Totally immersed in social media and gaming and the internet, and they are stressed to the max. Here's the thing. This is not God's plan for us. This is not His best for us. We aren't built to be continually connected or continually on the go, running here, running there, doing everything and anything. No, unlike God, who is unlimited and infinitely powerful in all His ways, right? Unlike Him, we are limited. We are finite. We must regularly be refilled. God designed us with a need for restorative rest. And when we talk about rest, I'm not just talking about a good night's sleep. And I'm all in for that, right? Everybody likes a good night's sleep. That's very important. No, what we're talking about is living life in what the Jews would understand as shalom. Hebrew word that describes a sense of completeness and wellness and soundness, a soul level sense that everything is okay. There's a well-being and peace about me, and I can rest because I know that God is with us, is with me. And so to set the example and show us how to rest, God modeled resting on the seventh day. Genesis chapter 1, you don't have to turn there, just listen. Genesis chapter 1, verse 31 says, God saw all that He had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work He had been doing. So on the seventh day, He rested from all His work. And God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it He rested from all of the work of creating that He had done. And you say, well, I mean, if you had been at, spinning planets up and creating rivers and mountains and plants and people and stuff for 6 days straight, you'd need a rest too. That's not the point. That's not it. God did not rest because He was tired, you understand? No, God rested because He saw all that He had made, and He wanted to stop and enjoy it. That's the rhythm that God has hardwired into everything. There's a season for going and growing, right? But there's also a season for resting and recharging. We see it in the seasons, the natural seasons. We see it in plants. We see it in animals. Everything in creation follows that rhythm. And it happens with many recharges, many charges each day when things finally slow down for us and we fall into bed and we get asleep. But God also hardwired us for a deeper recharge every 7 days, to have a Sabbath, another Hebrew term that means simply day of rest. Now, the seventh day is Saturday, right? That is the Sabbath, not Sunday. We tend to think Sunday's the Sabbath. It's not. No, not really scripturally. Sunday is the first day of the week, and it's good for us to be together on the first day of the week. But one of the interesting things, when you travel to Israel, if you're there over a weekend, it's stunning, right? You get to Saturday, and by sundown, I mean the nation comes to a complete halt. People are gone. You can't go to a store. You can't go to a restaurant. You can't go anywhere because they have wired it into the way the country runs. So from sundown Friday night till sundown Saturday night, the country is at rest. And as people are leaving on Friday afternoon from their offices, from their factory, from the schools, places where they've been all week long, they will wish one another Shabbat Shalom, as if to say, may you experience the shalom of God on your Sabbath. So if Saturday was originally the Sabbath, then why do most Christians worship on Sunday? Good question, right? And probably worthy of an entire sermon series, but we're not going to go there. Let me broad brush this very quickly for you. The early Christians were mainly Jews, okay? And they did worship on Saturday. But they also referred to Sunday as what? The day of the Lord, right? The Lord's day. The Lord's day. The day when Jesus rose from the dead. They recognized, they celebrated that. Now, over time, more Gentiles became Christians. And so the celebration of the Lord's Day took on greater significance than Saturday. So Sunday worship became the norm, and that's the way it exists today. But the pattern of working for 6 and resting for 1 is the same. It's woven into creation from the beginning. It's modeled by God himself. As you read Genesis and then move into Exodus, God commands this pattern of rest for the Jews. And he commands it for their well-being. Some of us who are reading the Bible through this year, we were there this past week, weren't we? On Thursday, Exodus 20 is the God's count of handing down the God's big 10, right? And commandment number 4 reads this way: but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall do no work. Neither you, nor your son, nor your daughter, your maidservant, your manservant, nor your animals, nor the alien within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. And God's people weren't getting it, so God wrote it down. And not as a helpful suggestion, when you get around to it, no, he said, no, this is a command. This is how you experience the best of life. This is how life is to be lived. And a Sabbath rest is a beautiful thing, modeled by God himself, given to all who follow him as a gift, a good gift, a time to enjoy God's gifts, to catch our breath, to step back, to rest, and to recharge. That was God's design. But when you get over into the New Testament, you find that God's people aren't getting it again. And despite the fact that the religious leaders had actually legislated rest, it had become a circus. I mean, it was so distorted in its meaning. And so this is what Jesus is confronting now as we come to Luke chapter 6, verse 1. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and his disciples began to pick some of the heads of grain, rub them in their hands, and eat the kernels. Some of the Pharisees asked, "Why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" And I'm sure they said it in just that tone, right? Pharisees. These guys, a bunch of legalistic religious rule keepers, referees of the day, the self-appointed regulators of whether somebody was following the commands of God or not, and as they interpret them. And they didn't just focus on God's explicit commands. No, these religious nitpicks, they piled on one rule after another, after another, after another, just to make sure everybody was complying. We're going to make this plain and clear so you don't mess up. And you say, well, what exactly was the problem here? What exactly were the disciples doing that was so bad, that was so unlawful? You couldn't do it on the Sabbath. Well, God had already said, right? You're not to be working on the Sabbath. That was a day for rest, not work. We all get that, right? We all understand that. Well, just to make it abundantly clear what that means and what harvesting a field would be, so if you were a farmer, right, harvested your field, we're going to spell this out for us. So they actually had rules that said there'd be no reaping, there'd be no threshing, there'd be no winnowing, and there'd be no preparing a meal. It was illegal. So what did the disciples do? They're out in the field, and they're picking some heads of grain. They're harvesting. And they're rubbing it between their hands. They're winnowing. They're threshing. And then they prepare a meal, and they actually eat it. These guys were so narrow, right? They could see through a keyhole with both eyes, right? No wonder. It's just no wonder that the Lord just gets totally sideways with them so many times. Just over the top ridiculous. Now, the question I have is, what are they doing out in the field on the Sabbath? Policing. What are you doing? I mean, are you resting and relaxing out there, making sure somebody doesn't pick a head of grain, rub it in their fingers and eat it? Resting. All right, so notice how Jesus responds. He answers their very accusatory question with a question of his own. This is awesome. Verse 3. Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? So David, Israel's greatest king, most celebrated king, poet, master musician, right? Wrote most of the book of the Psalms. So someone God had assessed and said, this is a man after my own heart, right? David, highest regard, right? Says, have you never read what David did when his companions were hungry? Now, what he's doing is he's referring back to what happens, recorded in 1 Samuel chapter 21. You can read it for yourself. I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. So Saul, he's gone crazy. He is chasing down David and his friends, trying to kill them. So David flees. He goes to this little town about 1.5 miles outside of Jerusalem known as Nob. Lots of priests live there. And the Nob, or the priest on call, if you will, was a guy by the name of Ahimelech. So Saul is chasing David. David goes to Nob, and he's starving. I mean, they are just famished. And so he goes to Ahimelech, and he says, give us something to eat. And Ahimelech says, I don't have anything for you to eat. The only thing I have is the showbread. Now, those of us, again, who are reading through the Bible, today's reading mentions the showbread. What's the showbread? You say, the showbread is 12 loaves of bread put on a special table in the temple. In this case, it would be the tabernacle. And each of those loaves of bread represents a tribe of Israel. 12 tribes, 12 loaves of bread. Once a week, they bake new bread, and the 12 loaves are swapped out, okay? At that point, the old 12 loaves of bread can be eaten by the priests only, according to Mosaic law. But David's not a priest, and neither are his friends. And yet they chow down on the showbread. So, let's continue. So he says, have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and taking the consecrated bread, he ate what is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave it to some of his companions. In other words, you don't have any problem with David. I don't hear you, getting all exercised and, worked up about David, which was an obvious violation of the law. But you are really amped up and up in arms about my disciples plucking a few heads of grain and eating them. And then he says this in verse 5. The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Oh. All right, so God wasn't concerned with David because God's heart is always for those in need. He's not worried about that a bit. Actually, God is most offended when his children do not give to those in need. Proverbs chapter 17, verse 5, he who mocks the poor shows contempt for their maker. Whoever gloats over disaster will not go unpunished. Proverbs chapter 19, verse 17, he who is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward him for what he has done. Among the many sins of Sodom and Gomorrah, Genesis 19 says that one of the chief ones was that her people were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy. Jesus is calling them out, and he's making it clear that their ridiculous Sabbath-keeping rules had replaced any of God's heart, or his concern for those in need. All right, so verse 6, let's continue. On another Sabbath, so change of scenes, but same sort of theme here. So what Luke is doing is he's stringing together several Sabbath stories of Jesus, okay? And each one has a Sabbath violation, supposed Sabbath violation to it. Now, you got to remember, Luke's not Jewish, right? He's a Gentile, and he's writing to Gentiles like us, most of us probably, if not all. And yet he makes it clear that Jesus' greatest critics, his greatest enemies were people that were fellow Jews. They would be the ones that would conspire against him to see him killed. So Luke writes, on another Sabbath, Jesus went into the synagogue and was teaching, and a man was there whose right hand was shriveled. You say, well, what's so important about the right hand? I don't know. Luke's a medical doctor, so you get all these little details along the way. It's right hand. This is right hand, okay? It's paralyzed. It's shriveled. It's paralyzed. He can't use his right hand. Verse 7, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. But Jesus knew what they were thinking. And he said to the man with the shriveled hand, get up and stand in front of everyone. So, hey, everybody, pay attention here. I want you to see what's going to happen. Nobody miss this now, okay? Just pay attention. And then Jesus said to them, I ask you, I got a question for you. Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil? To save life or to destroy it? And it says, verse 10 says, he looked around at them all. And I believe he looked in the eyes of every single person in that synagogue that day. And then he says to the man, stretch out your hand. Now the man hasn't been able to stretch out his hand. It's been paralyzed. And he did so. And his hand was completely restored. So the religious leaders shouted hallelujah, right? And just, oh, praise the Lord. That's a miracle that's happened in our presence today, right? No. But they were furious. And they began to discuss with one another what they might do with Jesus. They just do not get it. No, conformity to their stupid, dumb rules and regulations had replaced any sense of God's heart of compassion. Okay, so we'll push pause there in Luke's gospel. You know what time it is. That means it's time to ask the question. So, potent two-word question on 3. Let's hear it. 1, 2, 3. So what? Right. So we got a bunch of self-righteous, legalistic, religious leaders got this little myopic view of the law and Sabbath and all that stuff. And we get that they're giving Jesus and his followers a hard time, but what does this have to do with us? I mean, we all agree. I mean, this is over the top ridiculous, right? Everybody agrees with that. But is this a problem for us today? Is that the application? I mean, what does this really have to do with us? And I say, actually, it has a lot. It has a lot to do with us. But not because I believe this church family is overly legalistic. We don't have, I said this first service group, it's not like we have a bunch of people, a bunch of tattletales, right, that are wandering around saying, oh, did you see what she did? Oh, did you see what he didn't do that? And keeping score. No, we don't have that. That's not it. And I think we actually do get the importance of compassion. I was watching as some were arriving today, and we have the food pantry bins out as we do every second Sunday of the month, and some of you bringing food in, and you just put it in the bins. Now, we don't have to sound a trumpet call every month. You just do it. You just do it. Our deacons would be the first to tell you that they tell me regularly. Sit with them, and they're blown away by your generosity every first Sunday of the month on Communion Sunday, giving a special offering for those who are in need in our church family. You get that. You do it without hesitation because that's your heart to be generous. And I'll tell you this. I'll say this. I'll brag on you just a little bit. I have never known a time, and I've been here about 30 years now, I've never known a time that a need wasn't presented to this family, this church family, but you haven't met it. It's your heart to give. Legalism, lack of concern for the need. I mean, we have room to grow, for sure. For sure. Are there needs that didn't get met and we haven't? Absolutely. We need to grow, for sure. But do I see this as the main application for us? I do not. No, the thing that we need to understand today is that Jesus modeled resting and not rule keeping. And many of us are not good at this. Truth is, we don't have a single day of rest in our week. The closest thing to it might be this hour on Sunday mornings. That's assuming that we're here every week on Sunday mornings. But once we leave here, it's off to run errands. It's off to get groceries. It's off to work on the house or clean the car, do the laundry, or run the kids here, there, everywhere, or get a jump start on next week's work. We return some emails, get some stuff prepped for school, whatever it is. And we get to the end of our week and we are exhausted. Then we get up Monday and we do the same rat race again. And all the while we're running on fumes, truth be known. God didn't make us to run on fumes. No, He designed us to have rest. So, taking a day of rest honors the good boundaries that God has set for us. Resting recognizes God's design that we have limits. And we all have limits. There's no Superman. There's no Superwoman here. The only Superman who ever lived was named Jesus, and even he took a day of rest. Even he rested. Most of us have a hard time with this. I'll put myself in that category. We go, and we go, and we go until we can't go anymore. And then we catch a quick night's sleep. And then we go, and we go, and we go again tomorrow. And we do this week after week, month after month. And then, if we're among the minority of people who actually take a vacation, talked to somebody just before the first service, this service, that I haven't had a vacation in 3.5 years. If we're one of those folks that finally get a vacation, we expect that vacation to sustain us for another year. It doesn't work that way. God built us with a need for rest, and a day of rest a week. That day honors God, His limits, His good limits that He's put us, and it reminds us that the real work, you see, is done. I love what the writer of Hebrews says in chapter 10. He says, day after day, every priest stands and performs his religious duties. In other words, he works, day after day. Again and again, he offers the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins. But when this priest, talking about Jesus, when Jesus had offered for all time one sacrifice for all, he sat down at the right hand of God. Powerful symbolism. He sat down because it is finished. At the cross, the work was done. The work of salvation was finished. That's the real work, you see. And how many of us, consciously or subconsciously, spend our whole lives working to prove what a good Christian we are? How worthy we are of God's blessing. How awesome, we are. And God ought to one day let us into heaven, right? When, in fact, Jesus has already done the heavy lifting, and it asks us only to trust in His finished work for us. This chapter 3, verse 5 says, He saved us not because of righteous things we have done, but because of what He did, what He's done. And now, because we belong to Him, He has promised that if we will seek Him first, seek His kingdom, seek His righteousness first, then everything that we truly need will be supplied for us. God will meet all of our needs according to His riches in glory. Some of us need to lay hold of this because we are working, and I mean working hard to provide, working hard to get ahead, working hard to have more. And work is good, but work needs to stop. We need to stop. We need to take a day for rest and a day for worship. And in that worship, it reminds us, right, tells us back to the reality that the real work is done. And a day of rest anticipates our final rest in Jesus. Again, the writer of Hebrews, chapter 4, speaks of entering God's rest. And the final reality of that awaits every single one of us here who knows Jesus in a real and personal way. Did you know there's coming a day when you and I will breathe our last? None of us knows when that will be. Some of us yet still act, though, as if this life is all there is, and there's nothing else coming. And so, the truth is, we live our lives for the here and now. Listen, one of the best ways believers can be testimonies, right, to unbelievers, to those who do not know Jesus. One of the best ways we can stand against worldly, horizontal thinking about life is to take a day of rest. I mean, talk about countercultural. Taking a day of rest in anticipation of our final rest in Jesus. So how do you do it? How do you do it? I intentionally did not give you a list of to-dos. This is the formula. You don't do it this way, you're not getting a day of rest. Intentionally did not do that. But what does a genuine Sabbath day look like as a follower of Jesus? I can tell you what it looks like for me. And I like what pastor, millennial author John Mark Comer suggests in his book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And this is how I aim to practice Sabbath in my own life. Comer recommends 4 things be part of your Sabbath. The first is stop. Second is rest. The third is worship. And the fourth is enjoy. Stop. You stop working. You stop doing what you do the rest of the week. You don't do it. And you disconnect from it, right? The world can go on without me. It's okay. It's all right. I stop. I don't work. Rest. You sleep in. You take a nap. Maybe you do both, right? And you don't feel guilty about it. It's okay. It's all right. Third, you worship. You meet with God's people and you draw near to the Lord in worship. Fourth, you enjoy. You take time to just enjoy life. The blessing of this day. The good gifts God has given us in this season, right now. The gift of relationship with friends, with family, with church family, with good food, right? Whatever brings joy to your life. You take time to enjoy it and savor it and thank God for it. You and I were made to rest. The religious leaders tried to legislate that. They tried to manage it, micromanage it. But Jesus modeled exactly how it ought to be done. And I pray that you and I may follow his example. Now, I know there's a big game coming, and some of us have parties and things to get ready for tonight. And so the tendency would be to charge out of here and move on. I'd like us to just practice resting. So I'm going to invite Kathy and Tracy if they would come. And I've asked Tracy to just play a couple of hymns. And I'd like to suggest to you that you practice resting and being still and just meditating on the Lord in these final moments. And then Pastor Steve's going to come and close us in prayer.